Welcome back, Commanders, Cerebrats, and Executors to StarCraft Lorecast, the podcast where we dive into the lore, stories, and the interesting and fun facts about the StarCraft universe. I am your host, Jeremy, and I hope you're ready to dive back into our beloved RTS franchise. Forerunners, precursors, old ones, however you refer to them, most science fiction stories or franchises or any fictional telling will have a race that came before all others and either lifted or created the races within that story. Whether we're talking about the Celestials from Star Wars, the precursors from Halo, or the old ones from Warhammer 40k, this concept is a popular story beat throughout all sci-fi franchises, and StarCraft is no different. Now, if you haven't guessed already, today's episode we'll be going over StarCraft's own very specific forerunner precursor species, the mysterious and elusive Xel'Naga. Starting off with a quote: "The Xel'Naga created both the Protoss and the Zerg, Commander. They were the gods of their time." From Dr. Emil Narud. So the Xel'Naga were a highly advanced race, described as the most powerful species the universe has ever known. The Xel'Naga have been referred to as wanderers from afar, but it also has been described as their true name. The Protoss would refer to the Xel'Naga as the Ihan 3, the Great Teachers, the Makers, and the Guardians during their Age of Strife, and prior to it, would worship them as gods. And some Protoss still do worship them as gods, whether it's the Tal'Darim who worship Amon, or even some of the Dark Templars will worship them. And according to Protoss tradition, the Xel'Naga were peaceful, benevolent, and utterly consumed with studying and propagating sentient evolution within the universe. So they'd go from galaxy to galaxy, seeding life on many different worlds and raising them up, but would never stay too long, if I remember correctly. It would continue on to each other world. But before that, let's go into a bit of their history. So, where did the Xel'Naga come from? How were they created? Did somebody create them? Well, some mysteries are unknown, and some mysteries we have discovered. A nice little quote from Hierarch of Tannis is as follows: "The Xel'Naga were the first, born within the void. Their sacred purpose was to cultivate life and perpetuate the infinite cycle." So, originating from the void, the Xel'Naga were incredibly long-lived, even by Protoss standards, who could live up to 1,000 years at least. But they were not immortal. Eventually, their species would come to an end. In the interest of survival, they planned to create new Xel'Naga by uplifting two species. A pair of qualities was required, and these were defined by the Xel'Naga as purity of essence and purity of form, and each uplifted species would be targeted for one of them. Extraordinarily long period of time, these two species would naturally come together and merge, forming the next generation of Xel'Naga and beginning their cycle anew. Now, I know everybody probably has questions. Hey, what is the purity of essence and what is the purity of form? Well, going into it, purity of essence is a concept first pioneered by the Xel'Naga and is defined as the capability for great change within a species, or rather, to embody evolutionary potential. Standing in contrast to purity of form, the Xel'Naga would apply this concept when choosing species to uplift to merge with another in order to rejuvenate their race in the cycle of reproduction. In the case of the Milky Way galaxy, perfect example, were the Zerg. And the purity of form is defined as the ability for a race to have great psionic potential. So, and within the Milky Way, that was deemed to have been the Protoss would be considered to have that. So, and when you combine both together, you get a baby cell. I'm so sorry. So, the infinite cycle. What is it? What does it mean? What is its core tenets, or basically like that? Skipped over something. Well, rivaling the Milky Way. So, utilizing the Cadarian crystals, the Xel'Naga would carefully and indirectly steer the delicate evolutionary process of their budding species. No, hold on. So the cycle of how the Xel'Naga were born would repeat in numerous universes. At the start of a universe's creation, the Xel'Naga would take on physical form and enter the universe, seeding it with life. The cycle repeated so many times that time itself was affected by it. However, some among the Xel'Naga resented being uplifted into their godlike forms and saw the infinite cycle of the Xel'Naga's reproduction as horrid, relying on the conflict of others for the benefit of the Xel'Naga. Under a powerful Xel'Naga named Amon, this rogue group of Xel'Naga sought to undo the Xel'Naga's work, purge the universe of their creation, and make a new perfect universe without the strife of the cycle. So basically, what this group of Xel'Naga believed to have occurred was that the main Xel'Naga would cause species to fight, would perpetuate a cycle of violence that the Xel'Naga would profit off of, kind of like warmongers or whatnot, just to so that they could reproduce. They saw it as a terrible thing for the universe to go through and wanted to seek a way to stop it. And gotta look at one hand, they are kind of right. When you profit off the suffering of other species, it's not really a good thing, and you're not really a good person. But in a way of survival, every species does it, unfortunately, even in humans in real life. So, moving on to their arrival in the Milky Way galaxy, using Cadarian crystals, the Xel'Naga carefully and indirectly steered the delicate evolutionary process of their budding species for millennia, keeping a detailed genetic history of each race. Their protracted experiments produced many intriguing deviants and mutations, but the races that they cultivated always fell short of their enormous expectations. During their journeys, they learned of the Voice in the Darkness, a void-based entity which consumed entire civilizations. The Xel'Naga, who cherished life, imprisoned it with an Argus crystal beneath a barren world at KL. Going on to the firstborn. So, as we're aware, when the Xel'Naga entered into the Milky Way galaxy, they would seed life throughout that galaxy and would seek out two races within it that they believed would continue on an evolutionary path for cultivation, and they would kind of step back and let them go through. The first race you'd have would be the Protoss, which, as we spoke in the Protoss episode, Amon and his followers would kind of take a gander at and kind of help guide their evolution on a path that him and his followers wanted to try to help stop the infinite cycle. And that when they realized we may have messed up too much with them and stepped away. So, speaking on this, Xel'Naga would slumber within their chamber of ascension as the universe would grow, waiting for the two destined races to assemble the keystone and find their way to Ulnar. Because when they would do this, they would successfully make their way to the resting place of the Xel'Naga, and the Xel'Naga would thus begin the process of creating a new one of themselves with those races at Ulnar. But seeing their opportunity, Amon and his followers left Ulnar and sought to personally uplift the evolution of two species to gain the Xel'Naga purities. They focused their efforts on the jungle world of Ire, one of the Xel'Naga's engineered worlds. Pleased with the progress of its most advanced native life forms, the renegade Xel'Naga conceded that their latest creation was their first of all their experiments to evolve beyond the feral constraints of baser life forms. They gave the new race the name of Protoss, or the Firstborn. But they were unsatisfied with the slow progress of the Protoss. Amon and his allies accelerated their evolution and spent a millennium subtly guiding their steps. They would utilize devices such as the Cassia crystal to enhance their reproduction. Eventually, Amon Xel'Naga succeeded in leading the Protoss to a state of total sentience and awareness. When the Protoss became highly intellectual and introspective, Amon and his followers were exhilarated by their seeming success. Attempting to discern the full extent of Protoss evolution, They made themselves known to the Protoss and integrated it into their culture. Amon Xel'Naga would construct a temple to mark the site where they first put foot upon Ire. They would also dig vast subterranean caverns, vast cities where they would build vast cities where they would experiment on the Protoss. The Protoss were united by their fascination with these new gods, and they would call their new benefactors the Ihan Re, the great teachers, the makers, and the guardians. Amon Xel'Naga would marvel at how driven the Protoss were to plumb the mysteries of the universe around them. However, they reeled in frustration when the Protoss tribes grew further and further apart. At first, Amon Xel'Naga were intrigued by this ideological development and conducted an experiment to see what effects the diverging tribes might have on Kadarian crystals. They would create twin crystals, the Kalis and Uraj, from a monolithic crystal and gifted them to the Sargas and Akale tribe, respectively. These crystals' powers and appearance would thus diverge with their tribes. So, you know how it is. Forerunner species, precursor species, loving to go and mess with stuff that they probably shouldn't, and increasing the rate of evolution when they probably shouldn't have. And it would come back and bite the Xel'Naga in the ass because they weren't happy with the way the Protoss evolved. So, leading into Amon's departure. So, Amon Xel'Naga speculated that perhaps they had pushed Protoss evolution too far. As individual egos arose to overpower the once primary communal link, many of Amon's followers believed that the Protoss had lost their greatest strengths. With the loss of their primal psychic link, which the Xel'Naga considered the most fundamental element of their greatness, they deemed that the purity of form they sought to create had been sullied by a conflict of essence, and thus decreed that the Protoss were a failed creation as a result of their sentience being pushed too quickly. Amon Xel'Naga were already done with the Protoss and needed to work on a new species, but hundreds of Amon Xel'Naga were killed in a Protoss attack when they tried to leave, but they were fended off long enough for a greater number of their world ships to be launched. They left behind the Kadarian crystals in at least one ship. As we stated last time, that's is what would lead into the Age of Strife, where you'd have the Day of Darkness, I believe, where the Xel'Naga would leave the Amon Xel'Naga would leave the Protoss homeworld and go search for a new species to mess with and try to get a new purity of either essence or form, which they would discover within Xeris. Here and would lead to what would be called the broken cycle. So here's a quote from that voice in the darkness, the void-based entity that ate civilizations, would be gods who defied the natural order at every turn, though in the end, the Xel'Naga's hubris brought naught but ruin upon themselves and all they touched. But speaking on the broken cycle, Amon and his followers would travel to Xeris, where they dismissed their tenets of physical form and focused chiefly on the pursuit of a distinct purity of essence. They labored to advance the evolution of the Zerg, which was the most insignificant life form on Xeris, until their protogenetic manipulations enabled the Zerg to survive the torrential firestorms and thrive on this world. The Zerg ultimately developed the ability to assimilate other races into themselves, and Amon knew they had achieved their goal when the Zerg became conditioned to survive the harshness of space. However, the Xel'Naga were alarmed to discover that the original races assimilated by the Zerg were almost unrecognizable after only a few generations of their inception. Amon desired their ability to steal essence, but the Zerg were independent. Remembering their failure with the Protoss, Amon Xel'Naga attempted to waylay the potential hazards of differing egos by structuring the collective sentience of the Zerg into a unified, amalgamated hive mind, creating a separate entity called the Overmind to control the swarm. They kept a constant watch on the Overmind via a psychic link. So, yeah, they wanted to not fail again in their pursuits and experiments of ensuring they had the correct purity for Xel'Naga reproduction and whatnot, to try and break the infinite cycle. So that's how the Overmind would thus come into play with the original Zergs. And, they would keep a watch on it and control over the Overmind by inputting commands into its very essence, its basically soul, to follow. Because, Amon wanted to loyal, what are we still, not pet, yeah, maybe like a pet, to control and bend to his will. So, but as you guys remember in the beginning, most of the Xel'Naga were asleep in Ulnar in their chamber of stasis or chamber of ascension back in Ulnar and weren't aware of Amon's and his group of rogue Xel'Naga and what they were doing. But that wouldn't stay like that forever. Because when the Protons would create the Kala, their thing to reawaken their psychic linking of minds, the other Xel'Naga would be disturbed for their slumber because they would feel an absence within the void itself due to Amon and his Xel'Naga that were gone. So, but after discovering Amon and his followers at Xeris, a war would erupt among and between the Xel'Naga. In response, Amon would unleash the Zerg upon them. The Xel'Naga attempted to stem the tide of the ever-advancing onslaught, but the reinforced hulls of their world ships were battered by wave after wave of Zerg swarms with no signs of abatement. The Xel'Naga defenses were overrun within a few hours, and the greater whole of the Xel'Naga race was consumed. An action which threw the Xel'Naga plan into turmoil. A fraction of the Xel'Naga remained within Ulnar, however, and Amon himself was felled in the final confrontation. He was thus thrust back into the void and would twist it with his hatred, though the Zerg continued to feel his influence. One of his surviving servants, thereafter, sought a body to sustain Amon. And because of the Zerg's attack and consuming of Xel'Naga, the Overmind would assimilate some of that the Xel'Naga's knowledge as it processed dozens of Xel'Naga into itself, and would decide that the Protoss would become the Zerg's ultimate target. So we don't have much on this war among the gods, technically. Really, it's just, yeah. Because, really, despite suffering severe losses at the hands of the Zerg, the Ulnar Xel'Naga would defeat Amon and his followers in the final battle. Amon would be banished into the void, but he would still be around plotting his return, and only a few Xel'Naga would remain within Ulnar itself. And the Overmind would be unable to escape Amon's directive to destroy and assimilate the Protoss, and would thus take it and the swarm and leave Xeris to seek them out. And it would secretly seek a way to free the Zerg from Amon's control. Meanwhile, a surviving Xel'Naga loyal to Amon, Smir Doran, keep that name in mind, we'll speak on him later, schemed to use the conflict between Zerg and Protoss to revive his master, as well as to create a body to sustain him. So, yeah, all that would happen. But thus you would have a vacuum within by this basically dead Xel'Naga. Those who would normally tend to a garden, you're missing the gardener. And so stuff was allowed to grow without having a gentle guiding hand. So during the Golden Age of Expansion, Kirador became home to the Uraj crystal. However, it was later abandoned during the Discord, when a series of violent psionic storms brought Kirador and drove away its Protoss settlers. Fanatical sect of the Protoss took one of the Xel'Naga's titles, the Ihan Re. These Protoss believed themselves the one true descendants of the Xel'Naga and utilized much of their technology for their own constructs and vessels. And believing Terracine to be a gift from the Xel'Naga, Tal'Darim mystics would thus set up altars on Belshir to collect what they called the Breath of Creation. The Tal'Darim also guarded pieces of the Keystone on Monolith, Zeal, Typhon, not 11, and a derelict Xel'Naga warship in the Sigma Quadrant. The Narazim found a temple which the Xel'Naga had constructed above a nexus of powerful cosmic energies. They decided to remain on Shakir's to study it. Yeah. A lot of stuff would happen. You'd have people going after Xel'Naga artifacts from the Protoss, the Zerg, and the Terrans all throughout the Caprulu sector, trying to gain the technology and the knowledge that the Xel'Naga have for themselves. A lot of times people would succeed, but many times they would fail because you'd have all the three different races and factions fight against each other and would sometimes destroy stuff and whatnot. And yeah, but there would be somewhat of a return of the Xel'Naga within the main setting and whatnot. And that would be told mainly through the story of StarCraft 2. So, going into it, after uncovering a revelation somehow related to Xel'Naga, Zeratul sought additional clues to unravel the mystery. Both he and Sarah Kerrigan were drawn to Ulan to uncover a prophecy, rumored to foretell the return of the Xel'Naga, that was divided into three fragments, each kept at separate shrines. Zeratul would gather these fragments and would have them deciphered by the preservers of Sakul. Sakul. I think I said that right. Crown Prince Valerian Manx would use the vast resources of the Terran Dominion to scour the Kapru sector for Xel'Naga artifacts. His Mobius Foundation would seek out the Keystone. The Dominion would go to Marsara to excavate a piece of the Keystone. For months, Dominion engineers excavated it at Wet Rock Base and forcibly would ship citizens there from Backwater Station to dig it up. As they were getting ready to remove the artifact off-world, it was seized by Raynor's raiders. Fearing the Keystone's power, Kerrigan would disperse the Zerg to search for the various pieces. After Raynor's raiders had collected other Keystone fragments, it was assembled, and the Engineer Corps moved it to the base of the primary hive cluster on Char. The Terrans would protect the artifact while it charged. It was then utilized to extract the essence that forged Kerrigan into Queen of Blades. The Brood, you would use that energy to release Amon from the Void. The Xel'Naga, though, would wish Kerrigan restored as leader of the Swarm and would have Zeratul, by this point serving their interests, or at least what he perceived as the greater good, to guide her to Ceres, where she would be reborn as the primal Queen of Blades, free of Amon's influence. Xel'Naga art relics which house genetic information were also collected by Kerrigan on Ceres. Narud would battle Kerrigan on Amon's temple, which he had built Skygear Station on top of. Alexei Stukov would deactivate the 5 Xel'Naga temples that were amplifying Narud's power, and Kerrigan would kill, air quotes there, kill Narud in the heart of the temple, but by this point, Amon was alive again. That's kind of what happened in both Wings of Liberty and Heart of Swarm campaigns. But then you go on to Legacy of the Void, the Protoss campaign, where you'd start off with Whispers of Oblivion, kind of like prologue or section of it, where Zeratul, still searching for the last part of the Xel'Naga prophecy, would come to a facility of Mobius Foundation for information, would discover that Amon had been revived on Atreus. Zeratul, together with the forces of Praetor Talis, would reach Atreus and face the Tal'Darim to access the Temple of Eris, where inside Zeratul would discover that Amon was communicating with High Lord Malash through a void catalyst. Zeratul would destroy the catalyst, at which point Oros would tell him that the Keystone would usher you unto hope, showing its location on Korhal. Zeratul would escape the temple despite Amon's efforts to stop him, and during the reclamation of Ire, Amon would corrupt the Kala, tethering the Kalai to his foot. At the cost of his own life, Zeratul would free Hierarch Artanis from Amon's control by severing his nerve cords. The Keystone was taken by the Mobius Corps, however, it was reclaimed by the Dominion at Bennett Port and would be handed over to Artanis. The Keystone would guide Artanis into the Altarian Rift to Ulnar, where he and Kerrigan entered the Temple of Unification, and, in accordance with the prophecies, worked together to seek out the Halls of Revelation. Upon entering the Chamber of Ascension, however, they would find that those who slumbered within had been slain. Amon would then open a portal to the Void, but the Protoss were able to destroy the Void crystals which powered the gate, sealing the portal. The Protoss would destroy Amon's host body, and then would use the Keystone to extract him from the Kala. Once their nerve cords were severed, Amon was thrust back into the Void. Yeah, during Legacy of the Void, if you guys haven't ever played it, I would highly suggest picking up StarCraft 2. It's even if you just play it for the campaign, it is still a lot of fun and it's really good storytelling. I think it's sold pretty cheap now on the Blizzard store. I don't know if it's on Steam yet either. I don't think so. But if you have a chance, definitely pick it up. Great storytelling. Oh, over what? What was it? Because you technically have 4 expansions. I think Nova. Oh, good lord. Let's see. Let's try to Google here. When was the last uh, expansion released? So 2015. So you had a kind of a Wings of Liberty released 2010, and you'd have Nova Covert Ops mission packs, which would be the final kind of like storytelling of StarCraft 2, would release in 2016. So a 6 year release cycle for the story of the game. Really good. Legacy of the Void, we get a lot more info on the Xel'Naga and everything. But if you have the chance, I would highly suggest picking it up. Very fun. Not just because I'm a fan. So, anyways, Into the Void. Amon would plan to return as his hatred would fester within the void. Oros would call to Kerrigan, who led an expedition would call to Kerrigan, who would then call Raynor and Artanis, and they would go on to an expedition into the void and would thus defeat Narud with their forces, who would then be finished off by Stukov, because going into the story just a little bit, Narud loved to experiment on Stukov. Aemon would then send his forces against Kerrigan, but she would be defended by Raynor, Artanis, and Broodmother Zagara, while Aros would bestow his essence. So yes, within that story expansion, Into the Void, after killing Narud, the three commanders would be visited by Oros, one of the last few Xel'Naga alive, and would claim that Kerrigan was to be the next kind of like Xel'Naga, and would give his essence up to her to elevate her into a type of Xel'Naga, and going on from there, they would go and destroy Amon's void crystals and kill Amon himself, thus ending the reign of Amon within the void and stopping his plans to basically kill all life to create it the way he wanted to. But, so, yeah. And, within that story, after all that, Kerrigan would take Jim Raynor, they'd leave, they'd head off, and they'd go do Xel'Naga stuff together. We don't know, because we haven't had a real continuation of the story since about 2016 to 2018, I believe, because they stopped supporting it in 2020, if I remember. But luckily, we should be getting a little campaign with the new StarCraft miniatures game, which I have already pre-ordered a bunch of stuff for, but they're supposed to come out with a campaign book, I think, between August and October, so most likely September timeframe of this year. So hopefully we learn something new. You never know. But moving on to what would be considered the children of the Xel'Naga, the Dalim, which would be the Nerazim and the Kalai, would gather Xel'Naga corpses from Ulnar and would kind of, dissect them and try to gain insights from their biology. While the Terran Dominion wished to recover bodies but were not able to, Emperor Varian Lynx would request findings from the Protoss about what they've discovered. And the Zerg Swarm would also gather what Xel'Naga essence it could from the corpse at Ulnar. And as part of her parting gift to the Zerg Swarm, Sarah Kerrigan would gift over Queen Zagara, who is now the leader of the Swarm, with the ability for the Zerg to choose their own destiny, as well as the location of a sentient species that could house Xel'Naga essence. Zagara, seeking to have the Zerg undo the damage of the past decade, had the Swarm take only a sufficient number of the species and tasked Zerg Evolution Master Abathur with the creation of a new species, the Adastra, which could regenerate life on planets, for mixing Xel'Naga essence and the essence of the species that could house it. The life spawned on planets would also show signs of Xel'Naga essence within them. However, Abathur was displeased with the use of the Swarm to create non-Zerg species, as well as the peace Zagara desired, and secretly used the essence to create Chitha, psionic creatures of equal part Zerg and Xel'Naga that could control nearby Zerg, disrupt psionics, and halt communications. Abathur sought to have the Dominion and Dalim destroy the Adastra, sparking a war between the factions to return the Swarm to its former state. However, his plot would be revealed and his Chitha were destroyed. So, Either way, whether it was the Xel'Naga existing within Kerrigan or now they have this new species that they would exist within, the Adastra, the Xel'Naga would continue on as a true thinking species or something like that. We don't know. At this point, we just do not know. Hopefully, we'll learn more about them in the future. We never know. So, but moving along, let's watch their history, backstory, and whatnot. Let's go on along with their biology. So, Xel'Naga biology would be very great. Why? Well, because considering they were technically a mixture of two separate species combined together, you never know how a Xel'Naga would turn out and look. Many, such as Aurel's, Amon, and those depicted in Xel'Naga temples, would show like a large squid-like creature with a bulbous body. Others, such as Naru, would be large hunt creatures similar to void thrashers. Sarah Kerrigan's Xel'Naga form was that of a flaming human with large wings. So you never know what could happen with Xel'Naga. Best way I can think of it is it's kind of similar to the Reapers, yet not, considering they differ. Though the Reapers do technically only take one species, push them together to make a new Reaper, but either way, it's kind of like that somewhat. Creatures containing Xel'Naga essence would echo numbers of the Kukodujo series, as opposed to Terran Flora and Fauna, which echoed the Fibonacci series, which the Kukodujo series is a series of numbers that manifest in Xel'Naga essence, as well as flora and fauna that contains Xel'Naga essence. Flora containing this essence may manifest it in their number of leaves and pattern of margins. Whereas the Fibonacci sequence, in a sequence in which element their culture. The Naga would cherish all life and would refuse to kill anything, not even the entity at KL2 or the voice in the void. The Protoss would eventually follow a version of this philosophy called the Dail, and the Xel'Naga would possess some form of language exclusive to their species. At least some Xel'Naga buried or entombed their dead. And the Xel'Naga would use a universal natural code the Protoss termed Aradur, which means perfect ratio. Terrans would call it the golden mean, symbolized by phi. So, their technology. Now, like I said previously, Xel'Naga are advanced, even more advanced than the Protoss. Just like how Faith Smith Carrick would put it, imagine the Terrans obtained one of our fabrication matrices. Could their scientists ever understand their engineering? The task set before me is of a similar scale. The Xel'Naga were beings beyond our understanding. So, yeah, it's like the saying goes, magic and science can be considered one if you do not understand the theory or how the technology works, or something along those lines, I believe. Some technology is so advanced it can be considered magic, something like that. Don't quote me. I don't remember the exact quote or phrase. So, but this Xel'Naga understood that energy, essence, and information were all one and mutable. They could convert material between these states with ease. The Xel'Naga would leave numerous artifacts on Ire and other worlds such as Elna, Roxara, and Eridas. They would make liberal use of Katharian crystals and other such crystal center technology, such as the Cassia crystal, which was used to regulate Protoss fertility during their development. Some artifacts can be considered dangerous since they can manipulate the mind of Terrans. At least some are alive in a sense, once being described as an energy fossil. These artifacts are sought by Protoss. The Nerazim especially have made efforts to track these down. To the Protoss, much of the Xel'Naga's technology is akin to magic, and some of their shielding technology is immune to psionic powers of the Kalat. The Terran Dominion would make attempts to buy some from rival powers. Even the Zerg have used spies in an effort to locate the artifacts. Still, more temples have appeared on worlds such as Namaska, Eridos, where you could find the powerful Argus Stone, and Bekgar Ro. The latter disgorged a strange energy creature which collected Protoss and Zerg genetics for unknown purposes. Valerian Mengs, heir apparent of the Dominion and current emperor, would wish to secure these temples and study their technology. Watchtowers seemingly crafted by the Xel'Naga have appeared. The Xel'Naga would possess the ability to create space platforms and artificial constructs utilizing AI, or something similar along the lines. Then you go through all the different type of prophecies, like the Breaking prophecies, which relate to the planet Breaking, Protoss world with religious significance. These prophecies claim that he who harnesses this world will someday wield a great power, sanctified by the Ancient Ones. And then you had the one that specified your coming has been foretold, you are part of the culmination, but not the end of it. You shall show the way, the path must be taken, the realigning of old truths is no longer valid. Yours is not the hand, but your very existence provide necessary instructions, which is what Zeratul would tell her, but Kerrigan would not take seriously. So, there are a few known Xel'Naga. You have Amon, which we've spoken about. The one who wished to break the infinite cycle of the Xel'Naga. Samir Duran, one of his followers and servants. You'd have Oros, the Xel'Naga who would give his essence to Kerrigan, and Kerrigan herself, who became a Xel'Naga at the end of StarCraft 2. Moving along to some notes, the Xel'Naga were not a playable race in StarCraft 2, as only the original 3 races can be played. Story-wise, they form the backbone of the trilogy. The Xel'Naga may have played a different role in the trilogy originally. An early cinematic depicted Zeratul warning Jim Raynor of the Xel'Naga's linkage with alien artifacts that were the key to their return. For the release of Wings of Liberty, this content was replaced with Zeratul giving Raynor information about Kerrigan. So artwork of the Xel'Naga actually was not designed until BlizzCon 2014. Their appearance and position as godlike beings bears resemblance to creatures of Cthulhu mythos, which is a fiction horror universe written by H.P. Lovecraft. He didn't know. So, yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of the Xel'Naga, but if you look it up on Google Images or whatever search engine website and images, yeah, it is. Yeah, they do look Lovecraftian and Cthulhu-like. And interesting enough, in Season 9 of Hearthstone Battlegrounds, a Xel'Naga skin for Insoth was introduced. So, moving along to development. During development of the Hybrid Destroyer, it was known as the Xel'Naga Destroyer. A development version of the map, Echoes of the Future, identifies the Xel'Naga as the one who manipulated the Overmind to destroy the Protoss. And the Xel'Naga were considered to be a possible playable race in StarCraft 2. The Xel'Naga Keeper was an early look at a minion unit for the faction. However, the idea was dropped, for as the lore was developed, it was decided that the Xel'Naga would be too powerful to be a playable faction. While some Xel'Naga units appear in Legacy of the Void, they are not playable race in the traditional sense. The hybrid ended up becoming a Xel'Naga proxy within the campaign. So, yeah, that's the basis of the Xel'Naga within StarCraft 2, the ancient race that created, that like to see life and let it grow. I hope you guys learned something new with it. It was interesting to kind of look them up and kind of read more about them because I really didn't know too much. It was very interesting. Like I said, a lot of their story you kind of figure out within either the some of the books, like the Dark Templar trilogy has a bit in there. Some of the different comics include them. Definitely the what is that story? The one about the 1 Day War with the Adastra. Oh, I can't freaking think. I'm gonna go mad until I find this. Hold on a second, guys. Hold on a second. I know it's in here somewhere. I have it saved in my library somewhere. Oh my God. What is it called? I think it's StarCraft Evolution. That's it. That is the one. That is the one that I'm thinking of. That's the one that tells about that war and whatnot. So I would suggest reading it if you can, listening to it on audiobook if they have it. I forget if they do or not. The Xel'Naga were important to the story. They kind of set up everything just like how the Forerunners did in Halo and the old ones did in Warhammer 40K. But I hope you enjoyed this cast once again. This is going to kind of be a little bit of a small one because we don't have too much on them. And hope you come back next week where we'll kind of finish up our episodes on the main species of the StarCraft universe, where we'll be going into the last ones that kind of play a pretty big role, and that's going to be the hybrids. So, hope you all enjoyed. Hope to see you next week, and have a good one.